Okay, so we are going to be looking at the next part of our Cornell notes, which will be a little bit more direct because we have already been working through this in class. It was the main ideas. So I just want to make a point to identify what part of our standard we're looking at. We're looking at research, and specifically within that standard, really the main ideas are relating to gathering a varied and sufficient amount of evidence. And the important details as well, but it's also evaluating the perspective and quality of information critically. You should be able to demonstrate through your important details, your key details, that you can look at that information critically and decide what is important. But this is just something you're really keeping in mind. What we're focusing on here is really that you're gathering sufficient evidence, that you're pulling out the important things that you need to know. So they tie together, but we're really, when we think about this research portion for our Cornell notes, really think about this gathered a varied and sufficient amount of evidence. So that is where, under the main idea, we're trying to identify what are the kind of the large things that are going on in this text. So we talked about the first sentence generally being the topic sentence. So it's the topic of that paragraph, but those topics usually tie into whatever the thesis is, whatever that bigger claim is. A topic is often a claim, even if it's just a factual claim. The British Empire expanded into Australia. That is still a claim. It's still saying this is something that they did and I need to support it. Um, but it might not be an opinionated claim where you're saying British expanding into Australia was detrimental to or bad for the Aborigines. Then when we keep thinking, I want you to keep this concept of gathered a varied and sufficient amount of evidence related to research questions in mind, when that's why you really want to be getting, um, I would say you usually want to be hitting about 4 details per main idea. I say that usually with that keyword usually because sometimes you may get up to 5, but sometimes you may only have 3 points, 2 points because it's a really short main idea with details, and you're like, well, I just can't pull out. So 4 is a good number to be thinking about, but you can have up to 5. If you go over 5, you should be adding a main idea. You can have below 4, but if you really just have like a main idea and 1 point, there's probably, you just need to look a little closer at the reading because there are probably other details that can be housed under that main idea. The other thing that I was mentioning in class, or that we talk about, is the important details. You don't always have to write complete sentences. Same with the main ideas. You should be putting enough that you can understand what you're writing. You shouldn't just be putting something like Europowers use domination, because that is not necessarily clear. Um, but you can drop certain things. So maybe 19th century European powers ruled much of the world. Since I have Euro powers use political and economic domination here, I might take out that they and just put changed over to direct rule. And that clues me in. Oh, yeah, I remember reading that. So, that idea is that you can simplify these details, and that will also help you with paraphrasing, with avoiding just plagiarizing the text, copying and pasting the text. And you'll also realize after you start practicing doing that, it does take time. That you start to get your own kind of note-taking way when we eventually when you eventually compare your notes to the master copy of notes for source 2, you're going to notice that I kind of have certain things that I repeat um, throughout my notes, and it's like my own little language of my note taking, and that happens. So here, Miss McAllister was using these equal signs, and that's fine. You can sometimes use or you can pop things in like that. If you're saying like two things together, you could put a plus sign so it remembers that these two things were being added together. So those are little things that you can do that can really help you become better note takers. So with that said, I wasn't going to go as deep into this in a video because we did a lot of it in class, but I wanted you to make that connection between how the important details are supporting the main idea, it's your evidence and your claim, and how this all ties back in to that gathers a varied and sufficient amount of evidence related to research questions, but that bigger research standard. So, although I ideally wanted to be under 5 minutes again, I went a little beyond that, but hopefully that helped you out with that portion of the Cornell notes.